Is this the way in? Good afternoon. Excellencies, distinguished attendants. My name is Victor Madrigal. I'm the United Nations independent expert on protection from violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Yes, from the States, should tell you, I would have a lot of time to do very useful things with my life if my title were shorter. So please, next time. It's such an honor to be here with you today. We are here because lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and gender diverse persons, intersex persons, and other queer persons around the world have long been the object of violence and discrimination. I've been honored to facilitate the proceedings today, and the first privilege that I was given is to compress a 1.5-hour meeting into 1 hour and 10 minutes. Let's hope that we are all together up to the task. I will so thank you for your cooperation in this regard. It is now my great honor to invite the Deputy Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Wopke Hoekstra, to the podium to deliver remarks.
Your Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, dear friends, it is fantastic to see all of you here today. And a special welcome to our new friends who have joined since last year. Peru, Belgium, Timor-Leste, Portugal, the Dominican Republic, and Finland. We are now with 43 members. And this is tremendously important, because we are here today to honor a truly fundamental human right. The right to be yourself and the right to express yourself. To love who you want to love without the fear of persecution, discrimination, or stigma. To participate in society to the fullest and not be left behind. And to many of us, this might see a right that is completely self-evident. But to many others, unfortunately, it isn't. And the bad news is, dear friends, the bad news is that we are fighting an uphill battle for equal rights globally. Our human rights architecture and multilateral system is under attack. It is being challenged by rising authoritarianism and movements seeking to undermine democracy itself. International political support for human rights is unfortunately declining. We need to make sure, we as a group need to make sure that our human rights system survives. How can we do this? Well, intellectually, it is actually not that difficult. We can and should do so by empowering those who work day and night to keep it alive. LGBTI human rights defenders are often at the forefront, at the very forefront of this particular struggle. And it is because of their brave activism and visibility that LGBTI communities are often the first targets of forces that want to undermine human rights itself. You can count on our unwavering support. The Kingdom of the Netherlands stands with you, in word and in deed. And that is why we are the largest government donor to the LGBTI community and causes worldwide. And we will continue to defend equal rights to everyone and to work towards more participation of the LGBTI community in all spheres of public life. Because societies are more innovative, more resilient, and simply more creative when all voices are heard. And also because I am sure that we all acknowledge the eternal truth in a beautiful aphorism: none of us are free until all of us are free. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the Deputy Prime Minister Hoekstra. And now it is my honor to invite His Excellency Santiago Cafiero, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Trade and Worship of Argentina.
Gracias. dear colleagues, good afternoon, everyone. The United Nations LGBTI Core Group is a multilateral forum of great importance for the development of policies and projects with a gender perspective. We are honored to have co-chaired the group with the Netherlands since 2016. This reflects our commitment to the rights of LGBTIQ+ persons around the world who suffer from discrimination and exclusion in every aspect of public life, including in education, healthcare, participation in politics, among many others. Therefore, the work of this group is crucial to promoting and guaranteeing universal respect for their human rights, and Argentina has a strong commitment to the promotion of the protection of these rights. We have a strong regulatory framework that includes the Marriage Equality Act, the Gender Identity Act, and the Trans Labor Quota Act, and the creation of the Argentine Ministry of Women, Gender, and Diversity in 2019. This year, President Alberto Fernández appointed a special representative on sexual orientation and gender identity. Prestigious leader, she have a friend here. So prestigious leader is there. Prestigious leader and activist ambassador Alba Rueda, which reflects the important place of diversity on Argentina's international agenda. Since 2019, Argentina and the United Kingdom have co-chaired the Equal Rights Coalition, which is made up of 42 countries that work together with over 140 civil society organizations. Early this month, Argentina hosted the conference of the coalition in Buenos Aires, and participants agreed that we need to focus our efforts on the fight against violence and discrimination, especially in a global context where hate speech and anti-gender movements seek to erode the expansion of the human rights of all persons. To conclude, I wish to stress that Argentina is fully committed to further advancing the recognition and expansion of the rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex persons. Our countries co-chair in the United Nations LGBTI Core Group reflects the leaderships and commitment of Argentina to leave no one behind, consistent with the 2030 agenda, and to continue working for more just and inclusive society where all persons, without exception, have full enjoyment of their human rights. These commitments drive us to continue joining forces to develop a diverse, more just, and more inclusive foreign policy. Thank you very much to each one of you for being here. Thank you very much.
I'm very thankful for those opening remarks. The reason that we're here today is that precisely participation is at the core of what we know as the human rights-based approach. Non-discrimination, empowerment, and accountability surround this pillar in which people are heard. And the reason why they are heard is because fundamental decisions of public policy matter to them and to their everyday. We have the honor of two keynote speeches today. I will now have the honor of inviting to the podium Her Excellency Katrín Jakobsdóttir, the Prime Minister of Iceland. Prime Minister, you have the floor.
Dear colleagues, dear friends, dear guests, it's a real honor and privilege to be here with you at this very important event. Iceland is delighted to have become a member of the core group in 2020 along with Nepal. And I will not tire to say that multilateral cooperation is essential when we're talking about human rights and democracy it is so important, at least for small countries, to participate on this level. Now, I'm going to tell you maybe 3 lessons from Iceland on LGBTI rights. When I became Prime Minister 5 years ago, shortly after that, I moved the equality portfolio, including LGBTI issues, from the Ministry of Welfare to my office, the Prime Minister's office, where I created a new department of equality in the beginning of 2019. And why did I do that? I did that because I'm a very strong believer that political decisions and policies matter, and they can actually have a great effect on our societies. But it also, to speed up that process, it's very important to have decision taken at the top layer. Policies can bring forth very important change in how we do things, and those practical steps can actually change and even transform cultures and attitudes. And sometimes we see political policies coming first and then a change of culture and attitudes. I've seen that happen when it comes to gender equality in Iceland, where we actually implemented the legislation on shared parental leave first, and then we saw the culture and attitudes change. Now, for the past 5 years, my government, and this is another lesson, has actually made a very significant progress in advancing LGBTI rights in Iceland when it comes to legislation. We have put in place laws on gender autonomy, anti-discrimination. Our parliament has adopted the first national action plan on LGBTI rights of its kind in Iceland, and our new gender autonomy law actually allows people to register their gender without any requirements or restrictions. There is also a gender-neutral option. We have put more effort into fighting hate crime and hate speech. A bill was adopted this spring amending the General Penal Code to include a provision on hate crime and hate speech, protecting groups including people with disabilities and intersex persons. So what's the lesson learned? Yes, we have made this amazing progress when it comes to legislation. We have seen amazing things happen when it comes to policy making, but still, even in Iceland, we see a backlash when it comes to LGBTI groups. So it's not enough just to have the legislation. We must do all we can to safeguard social acceptance, and these aspects must actually go hand in hand if we want to see true change. And I think true change will happen. I think the politics must lead the way in that. Third lesson, and then I come back to the multilateral cooperation. Human rights is actually a cornerstone of Iceland's foreign policy and an international and also international development cooperation. And in this decade of action and SDGs, with the aim of building peaceful, just, and inclusive societies, the advancement of equal rights for LGBTI people must be included. Leave no one behind should mean really leave no one behind. Together with the other Nordic countries, we're also working on a roadmap for advancing gender equality and equal rights for LGBTI persons. And during our upcoming chairmanship of the Council of Europe, Iceland will place LGBTI rights at the forefront. As part of this, we will host the 10th European IDAHAT Plus Forum in Reykjavik next year. At the UN, we work with this core group on inclusive language in resolution and texts. This is also something that we've been working on in Iceland, in Icelandic, and is always, it sometimes becomes a very heated debate, but it has also been a very good lesson to learn for all of us. We have also supported the UN Free and Equal Initiative with regular contributions. The Equal Rights Coalition is an important forum bringing together governments and civil society organizations. And Iceland has recently doubled its annual contribution to the Global Equality Fund, GEF, which is hosted by the US State Department. And therefore, it's a true pleasure to be here with you today, Secretary Blinken. We have worked closely with the State Department under your leadership, and we look forward to hosting the next GEF meeting in Iceland in the first week of October. But what is the lesson learned from this? That change cannot just happen in one place in the world. We need to see it spread around, and therefore multilateral cooperation is of such importance, not just for small countries, but for all countries, but not least for smaller countries like Iceland, who really rely on that we respect the rules we have actually made together and agreed upon. It is essential for all of us, and when we're talking about human rights, these rules are really an issue of life and death, and really allowing people to be who they want to be. Dear guests, to conclude, our ongoing dialogue about the rights and well-being of LGBTI people is hugely important. And we must continue to educate, listen, and always speak up when we witness hate, prejudice, and discrimination. And maybe that's the toughest bit, not just to stay silent, but always speak up, always stop when something like that happens. In your home, at your workplace, but also here, also at the UN, wherever we go, because the same rules really apply in the big global arena and at home. And we're all part of this effort, because the fight for equality is not to be left to those within the LGBTI community only. It is of great importance and benefit to all of us that society is equal and accepting everyone, and we must all participate in making this a reality. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. It is now my honor to offer the podium to His Excellency Secretary Antony Blinken, Secretary of State of the United States of America.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And look at this turnout. It's wonderful to see all of you here. It's wonderful to be part of an incredibly powerful and growing coalition, as evidenced just by my three colleagues and friends who've spoken. To my friends from the Netherlands and Argentina, Wopke, Santiago, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your engagement. And let me say as well, I think we've just heard the powerful words from the Prime Minister. It's wonderful to see you, wonderful to be with you in this effort. To all the other partners present, we're grateful for the sustained work to champion LGBTQI+ rights. We're meeting at a time when the movement for equality is showing some encouraging momentum. A few examples. This summer, St. Kitts and Nevis and Antigua and Barbuda became the latest governments to decriminalize homosexual acts. A month ago, the government of Vietnam announced that homosexuality, bisexuality, and transgender identity cannot be considered illnesses, and that LGBTQI+ people cannot be subjected to so-called conversion therapy. At the same time, for that progress, which is real and which is worth underscoring, we know that people worldwide continue to experience alarming levels of violence, discrimination, isolation. Risks are the highest for people with disabilities, people of color, refugees, and LGBTQI+ women. Transgender people are often denied access to legal identity documents that reflect their names and gender markers. Intersex people, including minors, continue to be subjected to unnecessary surgeries without their consent. All countries, including those of us in the core group, have work to do to ensure that LGBTQI+ people have the same rights, the same protections as all other people. Defending these rights is central to the health of our democracies. Any system where some groups are treated as less than simply because of who they are is fundamentally flawed. Standing up for LGBTQI+ people is a top priority for our administration. A month after taking office, President Biden took action to promote LGBTQI+ rights in our diplomacy. Last September, he appointed an extraordinary person, Jessica Stern, as our new special envoy to advance the human rights of LGBTQI+ persons. Anyone who's worked with Jessica knows you don't want to be on the other side of an issue. Big mistake. This summer, the President issued an executive order to advance equality for LGBTQI+ people, including by combating so-called conversion therapy, supporting LGBTQI+ children and families, protecting healthcare and programs to prevent youth suicide. Everything we're doing builds on the work of literally generations of advocates who have and still are risking so much to put LGBTQI+ people and their rights on the map. And I have to say, as I read the history, learn the history, hear of experiences, I'm quite in awe of generations of advocates who've done so much to put us where we are today. The work we're doing is only possible because of the work they did, but not only the work they did, the courage that they showed. There's so many people that one could point to, but I want to just single out a couple of people. And I think they're here today. People like Liberty Mantaisa, who is here from South Africa. Are you here? Right? Right. Right there. Thank you. A champion for the rights of trans and gender diverse people. Thank you for being with us. And people like the individuals who decided to stand up to the routine and harassment and discrimination that they've endured at the hands of police. At a gay bar not very far from where we meet today. The 1969 protest at the Stonewall Inn marked a turning point in our nation's struggle for LGBTI+ rights and helped galvanize the global movement. This is something that is seared into the memories, seared into the consciousness of so many of us. And particularly for me as a native New Yorker, it's something that I have seen and been inspired by for many, many years. Stonewall is also a stark reminder of all the places worldwide where people are still subject to abuse simply for being themselves. That's why this group's work is as important as ever, maybe more important than ever. It's why we are so proud and determined to be your partners every single step along the way. Thanks to all of you for everything that you're doing, that we're doing together. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Secretary Blinken. And we do have a third keynote today, which has been sent to us via video message by His Excellency, the Prime Minister of Luxembourg, Xavier Bettel.
The right to be me seems natural, seems evident. But is it the fact that you have the right to be yourself, depending where you live? No. Still today, in countries around the world, you have not the right to be yourself. I know it by myself, having, I have to say, hesitate to do my coming out when I was younger, to accept, in fact, myself. Yeah, that's a big topic. That's a social pressure, family pressure, where you don't know how they will accept you. But on the other hand, you have faith, what even you have the strength and the force to accept yourself. You are not allowed to be yourself. This can come to jail, even to death sentence, to be yourself. Your sexual orientation is not a choice. I said it already in this courtroom. It is a fact. And we spoke last time we met about homophobia. In even some countries, homophobia is a law, not to accept people who are different. It's a fact. I'm now 15 years in relation. I'm married 7 years. Even when we think back in our own history, what would have it been 100 years ago? I'm very proud about the work we do internationally. Also, all the group, and let me say thank you for the independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity group, and also Victor Madrigal for the work they do. Because it seems evident for some people, but it's not evident. And as I tell you, we are now today here being able to speak freely about that topic. In some countries, you will be sentenced because you even post something which will, they call, promote gay or deviant sexual orientation. I would love a world where you could be like you are, where you could live like you are, where you don't have to live because people want you to live like they want you to be. The strength of our world is differences. But never forget that even today, in some countries, even in European countries, People tries to get popular and to get votes by dividing us. Do not accept it. Fight against discrimination. Fight against hate speech. Fight against people who want to reduce minorities to nothing. And we should not forget that in our history, in Second World War, it started by votes, by dividing nations, by promoting hate. So stay strong, keep the fight, and where in some countries it seems to be normal, do not forget in other parts of the world, death could be the end.
Thank you very much. We will now move to a section of the event that is proposed as a fireside chat. I understand that this is very much of a metaphor. Hopefully we won't have a fire here. Do an elegant transition. It's done. We have heard eloquent words from those that have preceded us in the use of the podium, speaking of the importance of participation and the importance of ensuring that lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans persons occupy public space in full use of their political persona. The old idea that sexual orientation and gender identity were to be lived freely in the bedroom, but not outside of the bedroom, which was the first theory already decades ago of the Tunen case, has now been superseded for notions of dignity, connections with ideas that it is important to be free and equal, also openly and occupy public space. That is what we talk about when we talk of participation, being at the room, being at the table, and not only deserving a voice, but oftentimes deserving a microphone. And today we have three extraordinary colleagues of this movement joining me today. I want to introduce Ms. Ilse Brandskeris, Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights at the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and a woman that I have admired for many, many years, but I'm going to say that goes for all of the persons in this panel. So please know that this is the case. Welcome, Ilse. We also have joining us Liberty Matisse. She's already been introduced to us by a reference to her extraordinary work of activism, Executive Director of Gender Dynamics. And we also have Mr. Alan Shaw, Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Chief Technology Office at Wells Fargo and Company. We often speak of coalitions. We speak of the work of coalitions that is necessary to make progress in these relations. And we've heard now the decided action by states to further these issues and to continue the work of persuasion of colleagues around the world, colleagues that may not necessarily view things the same way yet, as we know, as witnessed during the very heated discussions in the renewal of the mandate of the independent expert only a few weeks ago. Today we're going to have a conversation about that, about participation and engagement. And perhaps, Ilse, I can start with you and invite a few reflections on how can the United Nations promote effective engagement of not only states, but also the civil society that is meant to play a role through its agencies and through multilateral work. In the bottom.
No? Yes. Thank you very much, Victor. It's really a privilege to be here. We're in a room of already very engaged people, so it's easier maybe, but let's remember the reminders we had in the introductory speeches of leadership first of all, at all levels, and that it has to be done and can be done. And then, of course, the other part of that, the participation and the core, the essential role of civil society, I think. This is what we need to remember, of course, also at the UN. I think we need to start with the protection of civic space as a key topic that we can never let off the agenda. And then within that, of course, the real participation opportunities for civil society organizations, in particular in this case, making sure that we walk the talk, that when we are inclusive, that we don't leave some organizations or grounds out, but that we really are explicit about LGBTIQ plus organizations having to be at the table. And to do so consistently. It's convenient to do it from time to time, you know, when we are in a good room with people who support it anyway, but to make sure that we do that consistently. I think that we have opportunities as the United Nations. Again, for us, UN human rights may be something that we do consistently, but how do we make sure that we get the rest of the UN with us, the rest of the entities and agencies? I think the call to action for human rights that the Secretary General has launched and our common agenda, both of them, and by the way, the SDGs that were mentioned with the leaving no one behind, that we have to make it explicit that we really mean everyone should be included, and in particular stressing those who are more marginalized and more vulnerable, in particular LGBTI groups. I know we have a short time, but I want to just say that the active really participation is there to expand to all of the different expanding partnerships. I think we will have an opportunity to also include the business side of it. The advocacy that we all need to make, and really human rights defenders were eloquently mentioned, and I can't not include the important work against reprisals for cooperation with the United Nations, where I also am working with a specific mandate of this. We know that human rights defenders across the board are very vulnerable, but in particularly those who work for LGBTIQ plus rights. So making sure that we have the guidance to prevent reprisals, but also to react appropriately and strongly as member states, as civil society, and as the UN when they do happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilse. All of this, as we know, happens in a certain context where it matters to people. And Liberty, I wanted perhaps to liaise after Ilse's views on how this engagement can occur at different levels. What experiences do we have of how this works and actually percolates to the real lives of people, and what can we extract in terms of what works and what works best?
Thanks, Victor. And also just echoing that it's quite a privilege to share the space with everyone. And it's very inspiring and encouraging to see how the international line is being towed in order to ensure that we are advancing the human rights of all people, including LGBTQI+ people, and specifically also LGBTIQ+ people from the Global South in this particular context. I think that through the work that we have done, what we have seen that when LGBTQI+ people are represented at decision-making level and can inform strategies and decisions from lived experience, it does improve the outcomes of those decisions to, of course, translate into improved quality of life for our community members. In the same vein, when we are looking at strategic impact litigation and the role that plays when we are unable to have constructive dialogue and conversation with our governments, that being able to rely on an independent, impartial, and fair judicial system is critical for us to be able to advance and, of course, be able to use that as an entry point for law reform and policy development. And there's a number of cases to that extent within Southern Africa through which we have taken that route. In addition to that, of course, being able to resource civil society organizations and movements are critical, because we are seeing that, of course, the conservative backlash that are very well organized and very well resourced. And so if we are not going to be intentional about resourcing the work of civil society, then of course we're going to be undoing past victories won, and we are going to be putting ourselves on a trajectory where we are not going to be able to accelerate change to impact the lives of our community members. So I think those are some of the learnings.
This highlights, I think in a very clear manner, the relationship of the fight against discrimination and democracy, and the difficulties that are presented when democratic erosion actually creates phenomena such as the co-option of the judiciary. In that case, it's very difficult for civil society to find these points of entry. One of the unsuspected points of entry when I started this work a few decades ago was, of course, the world of business and of private enterprise. And I know, of course, that the United Nations has done, and the Office of the High Commissioner has done extraordinary work in this connection. But your presence here, is quite extraordinary in that it provides us the understanding of, from the C-suite engagement, what is it that can be done? What is the unique vantage point at which business are to be part of the equation that we are hoping to continue to reinvent every day in this work?
Well, Victor, thank you again for the invite, and thank you all for being here. We are part of a global community, and believe it or not, we are better when we're together, and so we have to always lead with that perspective. I think this notion of private and public sector is a misnomer. When you think about the private sector, right, we are, whether you're a hospital or your bank, our customers are neighbors, your family members, members of the community, right? Our employees are the same. And so it's very much public, right? It's very much of the public. And there's a moral and ethical obligation for any company to make sure that not only are we being thoughtful about what's plaguing or what's impacting that community, but when those individuals, whether they're our customers or employees, walk in the four walls of said institution, you don't all of a sudden stop being intersectional. You don't stop being Black or LGBT or a woman or a person with a disability or an intersex person or a trans person. That transcends that relationship. And so I believe that businesses have not only a moral and ethical responsibility, but it's the right thing to do to make sure that we're being very thoughtful and directly engaging in what it means to be community.
Thank you very much. And of course, there is significant work being done in relation to principles that have been developed by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And they outline some of these responsibilities that you have talked about. Ilse, I don't know if there's, in relation to that specific issue, some of the opportunities that we have in the horizon would seem to reside in that creative, visionary work that ties sectors together. What's your view at this moment in relation to those opportunities?
Yes, thank you, Victor. And I'm glad you're mentioning also the work. You know that there's the work on human rights and business, of course, is of long standing, so that there are those codes of conduct and coming together in dialogue. But specifically, our office has engaged with the World Economic Forum and came out with guidance notes specifically on LGBTIQ plus and business. And I think that that really shows that there's a lot of room to keep expanding, not to stay within our comfortable partnerships that we already have, but really make sure that we constantly look for expanding those partnerships. And we, of course, should be increasingly including, like the core group has done, expanding and growing, as we heard, but also for all of our partnerships to expand and also to address those who maybe are a little bit on the fence or who sort of sympathize but don't really want to be explicit about it. I think we have a lot of opportunities to do so. I mentioned already also the initiatives within the UN, the call to action for human rights, our common agenda. Our common agenda in particular is stressing the new social contract anchored in human rights. I think that that's something that we really need to use in this development, both internally and externally, to bring on board more and more people and entities, and whether they're at the national level, by the way, or global level. That's another thing, to make sure that we bring the work we do. It's not headquarters work if we sit and talk in New York about it. How do we really bring it to the field? How do we really engage actively, courageously in real partnerships and support and protect people who are the real actors, the real defenders in England. So
Absolutely, partnerships.
Yeah.
That's the key word.
Partnerships, right. I want to build on that. Two things. Number one, we can't, to your point, you can't be episodic. So the private sector can't, because it's Pride Month, all of a sudden produce advertisement and commercials of same-sex, trans women, etc. And then come July or August, we put it all in a shed and do away with it, right? It has to be part of your DNA. It has to be a part of your everyday ethos, the values of your company. And that links back to the moral and ethical responsibility. But also second, companies in particular have to show their involvement in the political process. I just recently, Secretary Blinken was just here. I was part of the U.S. speaker program where I literally went to Trinidad and Tobago for a week and worked with Trinidadian government to think about equal protection under the law. And guess what? They're dealing with immigration, migrants, they're dealing with LGBT individuals, they're dealing with affordable housing issues, clean food and water. So it's not just episodic. We have to figure out how to every single day in all of our decision making and how we invest and how we ultimately allocate resources as a private sector into making it better for everyone, not just a few.
Thank you very much. And having that, let's say, point of departure in those principles that we share, liberty, where do we need to create more opportunities? What's the next steps that we need to take from the vantage point of civil society?
I think that we need to create opportunities in all spheres of society for people to be able to meaningfully participate. And one of the ways in which we can do it is to take accountability for the reparation and restoration that needs to happen for how our community members have been marginalized and excluded and erased to the point where, for example, within the South African context, you find that unemployment rate is sitting at 27%, but for transgender women, it's sitting at 60%. And so how does different sectors step in and take accountability for advancing LGBTQI plus people within their respective spheres, and affirmatively so, to take up that space, to influence decision, and not in a way that is tokenistically the case, but in a way that is deeply meaningful and entrenched within the culture of that particular sector, in the culture of a particular company, in the culture of how we govern, to make sure that when we ultimately bring all of those facets together, it does produce leadership outcomes for our community members where we can see ourselves reflected in every sphere of society.
It resonates with me that you all speak of partnerships and of opportunities in a way that I think requires deeply knowing each other, right? Deeply knowing how it is that our communities are composed. One of the most striking lessons that I receive every day is that the LGBTQ plus I communities are not monolithic in nature, and there are very significant asymmetries within these communities. When data appears to reveal something and you disaggregate it in a different way, you suddenly begin to see problems that are completely invisible before. And this, for example, applies to the significant asymmetries between gay men of privilege living in urban areas versus trans women in color living in rural areas, where if you actually agglutinate all of them in the same statistic, you would find perhaps encouraging sign of progress. But in many cases, if you disaggregate that data and it begins to reveal significant asymmetries, not only in relation to those, let's call them limit populations, but also very importantly, the lack of data that exists everywhere in relation to lesbian women and their access to opportunity, in particular C-suite opportunity in business and in other areas of life, which I think is part of the pending task, is deeply understanding communities and deeply understanding how communities define themselves and how they define success in their own terms. To me, these are part of the dilemmas that we all have together, because of course what we do through events like this is that we are exchange our views to make sure that we keep each other not on the same page, but in the same book, right? Hopefully in the same book, and that is the book of fighting against violence and discrimination. I want to warmly thank the panelists today, and I want to invite, if there's a last word that you would like to convey with our colleagues here today. Liberty.
I think that we are at a moment where, particularly on the African continent, there's such a lot of focus on anti-violence discourse and how to counter violence, but not a lot of focus being placed on active protections being given for communities, and of course to ensure that those protections actually translates into societies that are based on equitable participation and equitable redistribution of resources for everybody to be able to live to their fullest potential and contribute meaningfully to the building of our societies in the world. And at the same time, when we are looking at constantly facing HIV discourse, anti-violence discourse, it stops us from being able to dream about liberation beyond that in and of itself. And I think that is such a big disservice, and the work that is being done through the LGBTI Core Group is critical in being able to shift us from what it means simply to survive in the world, but to actively thrive in the world where we can be respected and embraced for who we are, regardless of who we are, and perhaps even for being who we are.
Thank you very much. Ale.
Turn your allyship into advocacy. Power structures and privilege is real. And ask yourselves when you leave this room, are you willing, if you're a person that have control of that power, are you willing to give up that seat to someone else, to an unrepresented person, to an individual that deserves an opportunity? But because of the power structure, because of the privilege, they're unable to.
Thank you very much, Aline. Ilse.
Yes, and in part of that, I was going to say that please use the United Nations, the intergovernmental organization it is. Really, the UPR, there are a lot of, more than 140 countries have accepted some recommendation that had to do with LGBTI. Use it to put the questions and to pressure and get the recommendations. The treaty bodies, the human rights mechanisms. Victor, of course, is doing a phenomenal job, but it was not an easy discussion to make sure that the mandate was renewed. You had a key role in that, but let's continue that. Of course, ECOSOC accreditation of civil society organizations is another one that takes a lot of work. Participation goes hand in hand with protection. Just use all the means we have, exactly in the lines of becoming active.
Thank you very much, Madam Assistant Secretary General. And thanks to all of you for this lively discussion that I'm hoping is the beginning of a conversation. I understand now that we have a video that we're going to project. The panelists are invited so that you won't have your neck wounded by having to turn.
El Gobierno Nacional Argentino viene impulsando diversas políticas de Estado para lograr la igualdad real de la población de gays, lesbianas, bisexuales, intersex, no binarias en la República Argentina, así como también la implementación de diversas legislaciones que nos dan la posibilidad a los diversos sectores populares de la diversidad sexual integrar fuertemente los lugares de decisión. Y por supuesto, esto hace que la participación de la sociedad LGBTIQ+ sea una realidad en nuestro país.
From the total marginality of the social peripheries, from the total oppression and invisibility, the dignity and life of LGBTI people is taking a role in the collective narrative. Now us, LGBTI citizens, must be able, through the visibility and through the community, to claim ourselves in all public and political spaces, thanks to the tools and practices of the participation, demanding equal rights and opportunities against the systemic discrimination in work, school, family, society.
Es una realidad que las personas LGTBI sufrimos discriminación y violencia en todas las partes del mundo. Hay que garantizar desde Naciones Unidas el respeto universal de los derechos humanos y las libertades para todas las personas. Por ello, desde el Ministerio de Igualdad del Gobierno de España se ha creado una Dirección General de Diversidad Sexual y derechos LGTBI, a cuyo frente se ha puesto a una lesbiana activista. Y estamos promoviendo un cambio legislativo para la igualdad real y efectiva de las personas trans y la garantía de derechos de las personas LGTBI. También hemos puesto en marcha un Consejo de Participación LGTBI, iniciativa imprescindible para otorgar voz y protagonismo a estas personas.
I'm from Sydney, Australia. I am Cecilia Ram. I am working for Equality Australia on the Sydney World Pride Human Rights Conference in March 2023. And I am also the Co-Secretary General of ILGA. I wanted to remind you of the importance of addressing non-participation, specifically of civil society voices, in major human rights meetings and events like these. Yes, argue for more participation, but then follow it up by ensuring that those voices that need to be heard are resourced and able to participate. We have just opened our scholarships program and expressions of interest for presenters to allow more voices to be heard in Sydney in 2023. Because only by being at the table can we elevate our arguments to help the work that we do at the grassroots and on the front line. That is where change starts and where it truly matters. So for
I am a lesbian. It takes little courage to say this now. I can, because of all the LGBTIQ activists who refuse to deny their own inherent dignity as human beings, and who engage in the struggle for recognition of their human rights. Rights all LGBTIQ people everywhere should enjoy without risking their safety, their careers, their relationships with family and friends.
Hinsegin fólk einstakar hópur fólks. Við höfum fjölbreyttar þarfir og fjölbreyttar reynslu og erum í raun einstök og við erum mörg. Það getur enginn talað fyrir okkar hönd nema við sjálf. Þess vegna er mikilvægt að við fáum sæti við borðið til að tryggja að okkar sjónarmið skili sér í umræðunni. Annars er hætta á að við gleymumst eða réttindi okkar sé ekki fyllilega tryggð. Okkar reynsla, okkar rödd, ekkert okkur án okkar.
This forum must serve as a reminder for all progressive stakeholders to never rest in pushing for change. It's because of the decision of Albanian stakeholders back in 1995 who decriminalized homosexuality that today's Albanian youth feel free to be proud of themselves and to openly advocate for human rights of all LGBTI people. It's important to continue to fight for inclusion in order to create a better world for the generations ahead.
Thank you very much to all of those states. I have a backup. Thank you very much for all of those states and representatives of civil society. We now are going to have an interactive dialogue with a panel and United Nations member states high-level participants. Now, dear attendants to this meeting, excellencies, as you see, time is a finite resource, and unfortunately, we began the meeting a little bit later than expected. And so, in honor of the continuing summer here in the United States, I'm going to invite that you consider the time that is allocated to us as a delicious apple pie. The biggest slice that you take, the smallest size that is left for everybody else. We're going to try to go through the list that we have pre-prepared. And hopefully we will be able to get through the first number of states that I have before me here in the list. And it is now my great honor to offer the floor to His Excellency, the Prime Minister of Malta, Mr. Robert Abela. You're going to be given a microphone for sake of expediency, and the microphone is going to be navigating the floor. Your Excellency.
Thank you so much, Excellencies, esteemed colleagues. The right to be me. And I would like to very briefly explain how the application of that principle into real practice came about to be in Malta. I'll go back to the 1970s, where sodomy was a criminal offense. It was a codified criminal offense, prosecutable and punishable with imprisonment. Somebody, way back, the government of the day, notwithstanding Malta being a strongly and staunchly Roman Catholic state, so we can understand the level of conservatism there, somebody had the courage to remove sodomy from our criminal code. So that was an important step way back, because the government of the day strongly believed that notwithstanding public opinion way back, that was the right thing to do. And that is the first message which I would like to convey across. It is an issue of conviction. What the leaders of the day believe is the right thing to do. Now, fast forward to 2004. Why do I say fast forward to 2004? Because we had, unfortunately, a lull in the progression of LGBTIQ rights. We had a changing government. I will not go definitely beyond partisan lines, but we had a changing government, and the ugly phenomenon of conservatism raised its head. And what happened? What happened in 2004? We still had the same government. But a courageous person way back, Gabby, who we've just seen in the video, decided to organize, to attend, to hold for the first time in Malta, the Pride March, the Gay Pride March, and it took the form of a protest. The protest in 2004 was for the decision of consecutive governments not to do what was right. And for 5 years, that protest was only attended by about 75 people, not more than 75 people. Then in 2010, things changed. And things changed because that small group of people making up civil society started to gradually grow. Fast forward then to another 5 years. That same group led by Gabby continued to press forward the theme that things had to change. Now, do also understand that Malta is a small island. Today we have around 500,000 people living in the Maltese islands, slightly more perhaps. So it is not always easy to bring about change in the sphere of civil rights. But because we had a small number of people who were convinced in pushing what was needed, we managed to make the change. And in 2013, we were in the 18th place in the Rainbow Index, with only a 35% score, a miserable score. Today, and for these last 7 years, we're in the top place in the Rainbow Index. Today we have a score of 92%, which is something which we're very proud of. And next year, come next September, we'll be hosting Euro Pride in Malta. So that is indeed an evolution which we're very proud to have lived through. But to bring about these changes, you will always encounter difficulties. I remember that when we launched the first set of legislative reforms, post-2013, when we had a changing government, we kicked off with civil union for same-sex couples, and then we moved on to introducing civil marriage for same-sex couples, and then we moved on to introducing the concept of adoption of children by same-sex couples. And yes, we did have difficulties. The president of the Republic, way back, coincidentally happened to be my father, refused to sign the law, and the law couldn't pass through Parliament. But because we stuck to what we believed was right, we managed to move forward and implement that change. So ultimately, it's in how much you believe in equality. And that is the underlying principle, the right to be me, coupled with the principle of equality, which we have to continuously push forward. And if Malta could do it, anyone can. We had a huge number of limitations. I explained the particular context of Malta. And we managed to push through all the changes to come from last place, from the 18th place then, to the first place in the Rainbow Index. So my message to you is one, to be courageous. That we all know what is right, what is the right thing to do. That is why we are leaders. We are trusted by our people to lead forward our countries, to do what is right, what is not necessarily the most popular decisions, but let's drive forward what is right. And I wish to thank you for giving us this opportunity to be at this event. And I wish you good luck for all the good work that you have managed.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. I'd like to offer now the floor to His Excellency the Minister for Development Cooperation and Foreign Trade of Finland, Mr. Ville Skinnari.
Dear friends, dear colleagues, I'm going to be very brief. Thank you for having us on board. It's an honor for Finland. It's an honor for my country. You can rely on Finland. You can rely on our support. And you can rely on true partnerships, as always, with Finns and with the Nordics, I dare say. But also, as we have seen today, that we have a lot to do, but we have also found and been able to do positive narratives. So thank you for your great work. But also today, I think, and this week, we have to send a big message to the world that although the world is very interest-based, we want to really bring and deliver together. So thank you very much. Sorry about the timeline. I think I will give the mic further to Norway.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
Excellency, dear friends. When I became the Minister for Children and Equality in 2008, the first thing I did was to introduce the Same-Sex Marriage Act. This was after Spain and South Africa, but still very early. Therefore, it was a terrible shock for us in June when a horrifying attack was directed against people outside a popular hangout for queer people. 2 people were killed, several others injured, as we were preparing for the Pride Parade the day after. The parade was postponed, but last weekend a record number of people marched together for freedom and equality in the Rainbow Parade in Oslo. Pride is important. Diversity should be celebrated. Therefore, I was deeply concerned by the decision in Serbia last month when Europride was cancelled. We live in a time where authoritarian regimes are on the rise in every corner of the world, including on my own continent. And a core strategy in many of these regimes is attacking gender diversity, both when it comes to women's liberation and also LGBTI rights. At the moment, the Norwegian government is preparing a proposal to Parliament to ban conversion therapy. We have seen young people sent to therapy by their religious communities in order to change their sexual orientation. This is extremely harmful and should therefore be banned. And I would like to thank you so much, Mr. Madrigal, for bringing attention to the challenges we are facing and providing important recommendations on how to protect LGBTI people from violence and discrimination. So thank you.
Thank you. Your Excellency.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. And I'd like to thank everyone for the great job that they've been doing. The inclusion and participation of LGBTI people is about the fulfillment of human rights. It is about building just, inclusive, and open societies which enable every person to enjoy protection from violence and discrimination, as well as access to essential human rights. Coming from Albania, a country which experienced one of the most brutal forms of communism, we know best what it means not to be able to be yourself, not to be able to express yourself freely, and not to enjoy the most basic human rights. As we started the democratization process in the early 90s, we managed to decriminalize homosexuality only in 1995. But since then, Albania has marked meaningful and transformative progress in advancing the LGBTI rights. The Parliament of Albania has always voted unanimously the all-inclusive anti-discrimination legislation, which bans discrimination on the grounds of various characteristics, making Albania one of the countries in Europe which explicitly bans discrimination on the grounds of gender identity as well as sexual orientation. Recently, Albania approved the National Action Plan for LGBTI persons for the years 2021-2027. The action plan aims to ensure an inclusive, non-discriminatory, and safe society for LGBTI people in Albania, with better access to public services and specialized support, with improved legal framework and implementation, as well as increased access of LGBTI people to the justice system. There's a lot more that needs to be done, and Albania stands ready to contribute and do more, and to do its part also in advancing the LGBTI agenda within the UN system. But as an activist of human rights and of LGBTI rights, which entered politics from civil society, I have to say that I'm so inspired by your courage, by your leadership, and by your incredible work and that we stand proud and determined to work alongside you to advance this very, very important fight for human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. I'd like to offer the floor to Her Excellency Laura Gil, Vice Minister for Multilateral Affairs of Colombia.
Hi, I represent a new government, and this government is a defender of rights. So I'd like to tell you three things that we are doing right now. First of all, 30 minutes after I was sworn in, my first governmental action basically had to be to withdraw Colombia from the declaration of the Geneva Consensus. I had to do so because although Colombia had never left this group, the former government had actually endorsed the declaration. And we believe not only on the abortion rights that our constitutional court has recognized, but also we believe that democratic societies should recognize the diversity of families. So that was my first action. The second one was to announce a feminist foreign policy that will include an LGBTI focus. And the third thing I had to do, and I'm telling you right now, is that in 2016, opponents of the peace agreement with the FARC claimed that the gender ideology was enshrined in this negotiation. You know we lost that plebiscite. We had to clean the text of many LGBTI protection clauses. We are now going to fully implement the peace agreement, including the gender approach. This is the world's first peace agreement with a gender approach and a wide gender approach that included LGBTI protections. So we are going to fully implement it, including all those clauses, each and every one of those clauses. So all progress in Colombia in LGBTI rights has been done because we have very committed and active high courts. But we have to be aware that in Colombia, culturally, we have much to do. For instance, we just, draft legislation to ban conversion therapy drastically failed. So this is a warning sign. We still have a lot to do. Colombia is a proud member of this group, and we are going to continue working with you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Excellencies, dear friends, I've been guided by our hosts today. We know that the time constraints are significant. We will be in a position to continue for a maximum of 10 more minutes, since we know that many of you need to leave the hall, which means that with your great understanding and cooperation, I'm going to have the honor of offering the floor to the honorable representatives of Italy, Germany, the European Union, and Spain. The list will be closed then, and we will ask then the director of Outright International, one of our hosts today, to present some concluding remarks. Thank you very much for your understanding. Thank you very much for your cooperation. The only solace that I get from this very long list before me is that I know that this is not the end of the conversation. We will continue having it undoubtedly. May I offer now the floor to Italy.
Thank you very much. I will be very brief. Italy is a proud member of the LGBTI UN Core Group. I want to thank you for the job that you have done, for this meeting that was very interesting, very interactive, very stimulating. I've been very interested in listening all the speeches that you offer us. I can say that we have a lot of job to do again together. That multilateral cooperation is very important. Italy decided some months ago to appoint the first special envoy for the human rights of LGBTIQ plus persons in the world, whose mandate also includes promoting the wider decriminalization of homosexuality worldwide. This is a step forward for working together with other countries who have decided the same tool, but I know that we have to do a lot more from the cultural point of view, political point of view, and the role of UN is very important. I want to thank you especially for your job, and I want to ask also the United Nations system to do all we can to do together, not only in Geneva, but also in New York, because we can do a lot more together if we use all the tools as before was mentioned, all the tools that the United Nations could offer to the member states and to the civil society to cooperate for achieving more results on this field. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I offer the floor now to Her Excellency Barbel Kofler, Deputy Minister for Development and Parliamentary State Secretary at the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation.
Well, thank you very much, and also with the time constraints, and try to be very brief, and I don't tell you a lot what we do internally or what we have to do internally in Germany, because of course we have to do a lot of homework at home. So it's, if I talk about foreign and development policy, that doesn't mean that we don't have to do homework. But 3 quick points, what we're doing in foreign and development policy. First of all, we have to get louder. That's very, very important for us, and I'm very proud that we are joining, or that we are part of this group, and we are trying to be supportive on various levels. My foreign ministry was coming up with a National Diversity Action Plan, which is very important to really bring LGBTI policy and topics to international politics. Second point is we need to come up with concrete action. I think we heard that today also from participants on the panel. We have to come up with concrete actions. And I'm totally agreeing with my colleague from Colombia. My ministry is creating a feminist development policy, and that means an inclusive policy with very concrete steps to be inclusive in development projects on the ground for LGBTI community, and I think that's something we have to do urgently and quickly. And we must join forces. That's my third point. Promoting LGBTI rights requires multilateral action. We have to work together. Since this month, Germany is co-chairing together with Mexico the Equal Rights Coalition. You all know, an alliance with 42 countries. And I'm really proud of that for the first time at the G7 meeting of the Ministers of Economical Development, or the Ministers of Economical Development and Cooperation, Economic Cooperation, under Germany's G7 presidency, we have a communique recognizing and emphasizing LGBTI rights in the G7. I think that's a step forward also in the international communication and into the international debate. So being quick in these 3 points, I think we have to join forces and we can achieve a lot there, but there's still a lot to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. I had on my list the European Union, but please, Mr. Stefano Sannino, Secretary General of the European External Action Service.
Thank you very much, and I'll try also to be very brief. Maybe starting from where our German colleague ended, I think that we will need to continue to give visibility and political visibility to the LGBTIQ plus issue. I mean, it's not something that we can do alone. It's not something that question only on experts or those belonging to the community. There must be a political push behind it. And this is even more important. We have heard a number of positive developments in this in the last few months, but there are also many negative developments, not only with Europride, that unfortunately was not taking place. It should have been last week in Serbia, but it's the backlash in many of our societies, and we cannot be complacent also with what is happening in our own countries. I'm speaking about the European Union. We are far from being able of having achieved what we should have been able to do. I think that another important point, and it has been said during this conversation, is the legal framework. We cannot think that this can be done only with goodwill. We must enhance, if we want to make it sure that things are happening, we need to enhance the legal framework internally, and certainly we need to look also at how internationally. We've spoken about decriminalization, the fact that in many countries this is still a penalty issue, and that we need to look at that more. And the other point, which I think was coming very clearly from the discussion, is the fact that this is not, you were saying this, Victor, and I fully agree, this is not the same in all the countries of the world, in the different regions, and it's not the same between the same components of all the letters of the LGBTIQ acronym. There are, unfortunately, some groups that have been stronger, more able to structure and defend themselves, and others that are still very weak. I'm speaking particularly about the trans group, which is still fighting for the respect and for the possibility of entering the work market, to have a job, to have the possibility of avoiding the prostitution as the only option to survive. And finally, but it was also, it's important that this is a fight for everybody. I thought it was very interesting. Our Icelandic colleague was saying nothing about us without us. At the same time, I think it is important that this is not an issue only of those who belong to the community. I was very touched by what the Prime Minister of Luxembourg was saying. I think that those who have gone through this coming out process know very well what it means, the fact of the society, the problems, the school. That's my final point. I know that it's very hard, I know that it's very difficult, but families and schools are the start of many things that could change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sanino. And may I offer the floor to Spain?
Thank you very much.
Your Excellency.
Colleagues.
Cecilia Robles.
Thank you very much. I would just very briefly like to share a couple of initiatives that Spain is promoting in fighting violence, discrimination and exclusion based on sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression or sexual characteristics. We are about to adopt a new bill to achieve real and effective equality for transgender people and to guarantee the rights of LGBTI persons. The bill provides for the elaboration of 2 national strategies on both issues, and also the full and equal and effective participation of LGBTI persons is also ensured through an ad hoc council, which will be a permanent body of communication between the movement, social agents, and different government administrations. And this council will also map LGBTI resources, which contain useful tools to meet the needs of LGBTI people, their families, and relatives. And it will also provide a free toll hotline to assist victims of discrimination. We are also we have launched this year, the second action plan to combat hate crimes, which contains 86 measures to prevent, detect, and investigate this type of crime, aimed at protecting the victims and encouraging coordination between the security forces and other actors involved. So this group, the core group, can continue to count on our full support to Spain in the objectives set out in this agenda, so as to give visibility and support to the demands and claims of LGBTI persons at the UN. And I would like to very briefly use the second part of my time allotted to share my time with my South African colleague and to give him the floor, because we've been voted together.
You have the floor.
And I would like to...
Thank you to my colleague from Spain to give South Africa 2 minutes, literally 30 seconds to say 2 points. 2 major points. I think the colleagues have made the point that law reform is not enough.
Right.
That you need to accompany that by consistent horizontal advocacy, and that includes from our side ensuring that we need to do more to restore civil society, to do that horizontal advocacy. The second point I want to make very shortly is that the core group and others at the international level will be strengthened if, as the panelists have suggested, that our allyship and our advocacy is intersectional. That includes ensuring that we support the struggles of people that are oppressed due to race, class, and also in the international space, those that are continually oppressed based on apartheid practices that still prevail. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Director Robles, I used to chair a meeting with a Bolivian friend of mine who liked to talk over time. And whenever I said to her, oh, you're about, she used to say, Victor, that's okay. I'm going to begin to wrap up my first point then. And I think that's what you did now. And I see where my Bolivian friends learned it. Thank you so much. The passion with which you express yourselves is something that I think is very, very valuable to all of us who work in this movement. I would, however, not like to ensure that we have the vigorous voice of civil society that is present here in the figure of Executive Director Maria Sjödin, such a crucial part of the core group. And so I will ask that you forgive and please excuse me that I will now give the floor to Maria Sjödin and not to any more delegations, and then we will wrap up the meeting with those of you that have been so extraordinarily courteous to stay with us now. Maria.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of you who are here now, and thank you to all of those who were here before. I have reduced what I need to say to 2 points. Not that I'm biased at all, but I also have to say something about the role of civil society. So the thing is, we need you, the states, to push for our inclusion. Include us in your delegations to high-level meetings, invite us to consultations, and push for our access to the space where discussions are happening. Because we are on the outside and we can't do it by ourselves. And you need us, because change isn't happening unless we're pushing for it. And I know there are many, many experts in this room, but when it comes to the lives of LGBTI people, the civil society is where you have the highest degree of expertise. So you need us, and we want to work with you. The other point I want to make is something that actually didn't come up today, but that I had kind of expected given the times we live in. And that is the situation for LGBTI people in crisis, conflict, and humanitarian situations. Just as an example, Outright has a fund supporting over 30 organizations in Ukraine responding to the situation of war by pivoting their work to provide humanitarian assistance. And they do this because our communities aren't necessarily reached by the more conventional humanitarian system. And of course, you can all understand the right to be me, it extends to all situations. You can't stop being who you are in times of conflict, during a pandemic, or when natural disaster strikes. And knowing how high on the priority list these issues are, again, we look to you and we look to the UN system to take this up, because it is crucial, and unfortunately, as we all know, more people today are living in a humanitarian crisis than even last year. So I won't give any more recommendations on that, except that it is critical and we need you in this. So finally, I'm just going to wrap up by saying thanks to all of you, but I want to particularly thank Argentina and the Netherlands for co-chairing the core group. Without your leadership, we wouldn't be where we are today. And I mean, it was so exciting today to welcome the first Caribbean state to the core group, and Finland, of course, very close to my Swedish heart. So thank you very much for your leadership, and thank you all, everyone who was here today.
Thank you very much for staying. Thank you very much for your passion. It's a wrap. Next time. Goodbye.